So I've been in it since the very, very beginning. So I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly. And I've also seen, sometimes coaching made too complicated. I've always quoted him for giving me this quote: simplicity done brilliantly creates greatness. And I think the way the game's going is it's going to be far more contact, collision, technical accuracy. The game's just going that way. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to go out to change the game in that small area. But at the end of the day, it's still people, And I always say, I coach people, I don't coach players. 65-70% is coaching people, and you add the technical things on. Be yourself. Just be yourself, And I'll tell you what, don't compromise on it. Stay in the game. That's all you need.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode on the Lessons from the Game podcast, and as usual I'm joined with my co-host Ben Pegner. Today's guest is a true pioneer in the world of contact and collision. Richie Gray is a former international coach who's worked with the Springboks, Scotland, Fiji and even NFL giants like the Philadelphia Eagles. He's the founder of GSI Performance, inventor of game-changing training tools, and someone who shaped the way we coach. Impact in modern day rugby. More than that, he's been a mentor to me, and today we get to unpack his journey. Richie, brother, how's it going? You all good?
Very good intro, G. And is it my fault? And is it my fault? Anything that's gone wrong in your life since you retired? It's me.
Oh man, it's your fault that I've created all these crazy frameworks and all these crazy Scrum methods and stuff, which is happening today, And I got another funny story in terms of about my mindset, which I used today in our Scrum meeting, which was a bit out of the box there, but we'll get into that a bit later. Ben, good to see you, man. How's things going there in the UK?
Yeah, good. Thanks, G. In sunny London, nice and warm down here. Yeah, probably similar to Richie up in Scotland, actually.
Okay, sunny in London,
mate. Yeah. Now, how's it there? You good?
It's actually, boys. The laugh is it's actually warmer in Scotland than it is in the south of France at the moment. So I've come back for the right week.
Yeah, CG,
guys,
heat wave.
Heat wave.
Anyway, guys, the sun is out, and it's really been a tough day because I got quite a few invites for tonight for the apéro. Here in France, I love the apéro. So that means getting together, have a few glasses of wine, rosé. Unfortunately, I had to decline, all right, because we got the spot tonight with my man, Richie Gray. I'm super excited about this spot, Richie. I'm really looking forward to chatches. Do you know how's things going your side? All good your side? Everybody well?
Yeah, listen, G, it's been, it's great to catch up with you again. And, I can still remember our conversations just when it was coming at the end of the Springbok time for you as a player, when I was moving on as a coach as well. And obviously we bumped into each other a lot over the last, since that would be 2016. So you're looking at the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. Yeah. It's just gone like that. But, I've always been, I think, well, a lot of the guys that you work with or you've sort of helped out and you mentioned mentored, and I always think that's a pretty big word to use, but you always take real pride in and kind of just a good feeling when you see guys that have played and then have gone on to coach, and you hit the social media trail way before I did. I'm still bloody useless at it, to be honest, and I keep getting asked, you should do this and do a pod here and have your own show, and good on you for doing it, because I don't know, I'm always battling for time, but then I've got quite a few things on, but it's great to catch up with you, and it's obviously good to see what you've gone on to do. And the crazy thing is we've ended up coaching against each other
a few times. I told him, be careful of the collision king. He's coming for you.
Nice.
These nights.
Today's Lessons from the Game episode was possible thanks to the support of Harris Begley Financial Planning, headed up by former Blackheath player Matt Begley. They are the experts to speak to for tailored advice on investments, mortgages, insurance, and pensions, helping you plan for a future of financial security. So when you think money, think Harris Begley and head to www.harrisbegley.co.uk. Approver Quilter Financial Services Limited and Quilter Mortgage Planning Limited, March 2025.
Right, we got lots to cover today because I'm super pumped about this, Richie. I didn't sleep last night. Actually, I had to eat the pizza just to calm down. But Richie, we always start off our podcast every single week, or at least we try to. Last week, I actually forgot that, Ben. We would like you to share with our audience who's young and aspiring rugby players and coaches, what's the one lesson from the game that you have learned, which you can share with those young rugby players and coaches?
Geez, there's always a lot, and I think you get asked that question a lot, and I could mention quite a few things over the years. I'm 55 years old now, so I've been coaching.
Still a young man.
Still a young man. I've been coaching. I came out of PE college and was meant to be a physical education teacher, but went straight into rugby 1 year before it went pro. So I've been in it since the very, very beginning. So I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I've also seen, sometimes coaching made too complicated, the game being made too complicated, especially when you're a young coach. You're trying to learn your way and you're trying to find your way, and you sometimes speak to other coaches that obviously you perceive have been there and seen it and done it, and they talk about a game that's just so complex and complicated. You think, I wonder if I'll ever understand the game like they do. It's not until you get to this age you find out, I think a lot of it was just flannel and, to make it sound more difficult than it was. So the first thing I would say to any youngster or any young coach is, and it's a great quote from a good friend of ours, Heineke Meyer, and I still remember it now, and I've always quoted him for giving me this quote, is simplicity done brilliantly creates greatness.
Wow,
and
love it.
It's still one of the best coaches quotes ever, because sometimes we just complicate things, and again, I'll say it, simplicity done brilliantly creates greatness. I would maybe add another sentence to that now, especially under fatigue, because that's the game that we're in. But the simple things are still the best things. And a lot of players try to overcomplicate their game. They try to be a master of many, and sometimes jack of all trades, master of none comes to mind. So the first thing is, don't overcomplicate it and do the things that are really needed in the game brilliantly over and over again, especially when fatigued. And maybe another one, just from a personal point of view, is don't take yourself too seriously either. I think I sometimes run into a lot of people in different sports, and I'm lucky I'm linked to a number, that, just got to calm down a little bit. We're all in this together. We all know what winning's like. We all know what losing's like. We know what tough times are like. So just don't take yourself too seriously. Be able to still find a little bit of humor and laugh and enjoy it, because sometimes, as guys, in our world, it can sometimes get incredibly serious where it drains the life out of you, so just keep everything in perspective.
Yeah, that's so true. I can definitely talk with it from experience, Richie. The mental load we experience as coaches and back in the day as players, then sometimes we don't have the right outlets and we're just tired. And even last week, I was under the pump last week, traveling to Paris, going to South African embassy and just all over the place. And at some stage I just said, stop, just take it easy, just relax. Do something which you enjoy. So obviously I went to go buy some ice cream, 3 scoops of that, Snickers. I think the other one was pecan nut, and Ferrero Rocher was brilliant. Okay, it was Bayer, so it was good quality. But off the bat, I just want to say, Richie, I know you said it's a big responsibility responsibility that comes with the name of being a mentor, but you had a massive role in my journey. So I just want to say this publicly. Thanks for the role that you played. I still remember, I still gave you that phone call back in the day. I was in Toulouse in my garage gym. I had no idea I was going to start becoming a coach and what I need to do. You just told me, G, you need to become great at one skill.
Yep,
you need to
that's it.
become a specialist. You need to be the best of something that doesn't exist. And that stayed in my mind. And I remember driving out to Montpellier, grabbing our lunches, chatting, and you'll probably be happy. I'm finally using Audible, listening to all those books like you told me to do. I only did it years later. But yeah, just out of the bottom of my heart, thanks for all the guidance you gave me. And we're going to talk about some of the stories as well, how you helped me on my journey. But man, you've been busy. You've been busy. You know, we see all the young rugby players today, they're spending time on their phones. They're playing Brostar. Some of them are playing Fortnite. It's all about leveling up. And you've certainly leveled up from creating this crazy equipment so people can destroy guys, or like Bakkies Botha would say, inflict pain in the contact zone. You found yourself in the US and become an urban legend in the NFL. And I need to go double check this. You were instrumental in one of the victories of the Philadelphia Sea Eagles, if I'm not mistaken. All right.
You know what? I'm going to
Brotherly
stop you
shove.
there, G. I'm going to stop you because I automatically get embarrassed, right, when I hear all these things. I'm sitting here having to listen to this. And I think it's just, you know, I come from the borders, the Scottish borders, where if you step above yourself even 1 millimeter, somebody's going to chop the legs from you, you know? And I can always remember when we were in the 2015 World Cup and we were playing Scotland in Newcastle. It's in James's Park. So the Scottish guy was coming back to obviously take on his own country, you know, in Newcastle, just over the border from Scotland. So it was about 1.5 hours from where I stay, the Scottish borders, massive rugby area, all the towns and the villages, huge rugby area. And I said to Peter de Villiers, you know, who was obviously our scrum coach then, Peter, I said, come on, we're going to head up to Gala for the day, you know. I said, I've not been back in my town for about 5 months because literally you packed your bags in World Cup year and that was it. You just didn't come home. You know, I think I was away 8.5 out of 12 months in that 2015. So I said to Peter, come on, we're going to hire a car. I'll drive you up to Gala Shields, my hometown. You know, you should be okay. And there was myself, Peter, I think Heineke might have been there as well. Peter Creer, who was the sports psychologist. There was a wee group that I took up there. And I can remember, we've got a local pub in our town called the Old Mill, right? Legendary, spit and sawdust, you know, old man's bar. It's maybe a little bit more modern now, but that's where everything's sorted out in my town. It's sorted out in that bar. Right in the middle of the town. So you've got the Reaver, which is a statue of this sort of old-fashioned gangster that used to ride horses and slaughter the English and pretty much slaughter everybody and steal all the sheep and bring them back. So you've got all this sort of history, and we're walking round the side of the fountain, and I was quite excited about coming back to my hometown. And I was saying to the boys, listen, you're going to like this. We're coming back home now. I kind of forgot that South Africa was playing Scotland, which was obviously, you know, the country. And there was quite a big feeling, you know, of Scottish support, obviously, in Gala Shields, in the heart of the borders. And I remember we came round the corner and, you know, he's not with us anymore, but there was a gentleman standing at the door of the bar and he just shouted, Richie Gray, you traiting bastard. Right, like right across the street. And I could feel Pete de Villiers and these guys going, oh, you know, what the hell have we come to here? And I said, don't worry, boys, keep walking. Gray, you're a bastard. Gray. There was guys poking their heads out of everywhere. But the closer I got, the more it started to calm down. And all of a sudden, you're greeted then with a big hug. And it's, hey, how are you doing? Everyone's going well. And we had a great afternoon in that local bar. So, you know, it's crazy the stories, G, that come about from the sport that we're in, you know. And no, it's funny. And I think back to you, and I think back to, you know, at the very end of your career, I just found you speaking to me, and it like was so what I had gone through, because I didn't have an international career. I was a provincial class player, club player, and I thoroughly enjoyed my rugby. I was never going to be one of these barstool preachers that said, you know what, I could have played at this level if this had happened, and if I'd not had that injury, I'd have been this. No, I wasn't athletically gifted enough, right, to play test match rugby. But I always had to try twice as hard as everybody else. But I always think I had innovation in me, And funnily enough, that bar that I talked about, I remember losing my job with Scottish Rugby, right? They got rid of the Border Reivers professional team, so we all lost our jobs. I'd worked with the SRU for 12 years. I was one of the sort of longest working guys in the union. Newly married, child on the way, mortgage up to the eyeballs, as every young couple does. And then all of a sudden, we were made redundant. You didn't have a job, and there wasn't a lot of pro rugby jobs going about in Scotland then. So I remember that Saturday night going to that bar with my 4 or 5 of my good mates, and they're saying, what are you going to do? And I'd kind of thought about it, and I'd been thinking about it for a while. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I said, I think the way the game's going is it's going to be far more contact, collision, technical accuracy. The game's just going that way. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to go out to change the game in that small area you talked about in one thing. That was going to be it for me. But I said, boys, the only way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have to coach international rugby. I'm going to have to involved in some way with rugby league. And I'm going to have to do the NFL as well. Well, they just all rolled about laughing, Gray, like, how many beers have you had, And I just thought, no, I said, if I'm going to do it properly, that's the way I'm going to do it. And I said, there's 3 things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to rewrite methodology. You're going to have to create all the analytical papers that go with it. And you know what? You're going to have to design the equipment, because the equipment wasn't good enough. And that was the start. So the corner of that bar there, funnily enough, there's a South African rugby jersey now hangs there, and it's got Richie Gray, Gala, and South Africa. It's brilliant. I love it, because folk think, what the heck's this? And obviously since then you've had Scotland and Fiji as well. But, that bar's got a lot to answer for. And there's a lot of things went on behind it. But I've always, maybe luckily, you've always had an idea, or you've kind of smelled where the game's going to go next. And not just rugby, the game of contact and collision. And you've then acted on it. Because, there's talkers and doers, as we say. There's a lot of guys I meet that talk a great game, but they don't do it. You've got to talk it, and you've got to do it, Simple as that.
Oh, Richie, you're opening a big can of worms here. So different avenues. I'm looking at Ben spinning. I'm spinning as well. But I think the big question I want to ask you is, Richie, you're in that environment now. You've been fortunate to have been involved in the highest level. You've been involved with the Springboks, Scotland Rugby, Fiji, and you're also consulting with the various top-level elite teams in rugby as well. And you got this opportunity, to coach or to consult in the NFL. So, one, how did that opportunity come about? How did you get that great opportunity? And what insights can you give us in terms of how you bring value to the contact situation in the NFL? And we've seen in the US, a lot of people fear rugby. They say we are crazy. But what can you share with your journey so far in the NFL?
Yeah, well, your first question actually touched on the NFL, so I'll kind of go back to it now. But here's the next crazy thing, and there's been a massive, I'm a great believer in what's meant for you. Somebody's guiding you on a path, right? You can think what you want. Many people have different ways of talking about it. It could be faith, it could be a belief. I'll never knock anybody for, how they go about living their life. I always say it's not difficult to be a good person, but the key is that sometimes things just happen for you, and many, many years ago, before I even coached the Springboks, I was sent by the Scottish Rugby Union, Jim Telfer, who obviously legendary old British Lions coach who lives about half a mile from me here in Galashiels, and I still see him pretty much, once or twice a month. Great to catch up with him. We were about to start academies. So I said, listen, I would like to go to South Africa just to see Super Rugby, because then it was Super 12 or Super 10. And I wanted to go out and see what was going on, because I felt that was going to be the next big thing in rugby. We'd never really seen anything quite like it. So Jim said, right, I tell you what, if you take a sabbatical and we don't pay you, so none of the other employees get hacked off that Richie Gray is getting sent away here, and you do it on your own, go for it. So I got in touch with a guy called Phil Mack, who was the fitness conditioning coach, you'll remember him well, for the Stormers, which was the Men in Black, Bob Skinstad, Corny Krieger, Breton Pulsar, Flecky, all these guys, Sean Rue, were all there. And Alan Solomons was the coach. So I did time there with them, 6, 8, 10 weeks. It was phenomenal, really enjoyed it. But I met a guy called Wayne Diesel, who was the physiotherapist there, right? And Wayne went on to be one of the top performance gurus on the planet, because from there, he then went into association football, he went into rugby, but unbeknown to me, he was at the Miami Dolphins. So on the morning of the semi-final of the World Cup in 2015, I'm in my bedroom in London before we play the All Blacks in the semi-final, and I get a phone call on my mobile phone. Wayne Diesel here, do you remember? I said, and I've got a brilliant memory for anything to do with rugby, anything like that at all. Plays, rugby, people, players, memory, phenomenal. Chemistry, biology, higher mathematics, maybe not the best, but when it comes to my own little world, no problem. And I said, Wayne, I do remember you. Great. He said, what are you doing after the World Cup? And I said, well, it's going to be a kind of downtime before. I was going to then work with the Blitzboks before they went to the Rio Olympics with Neil Powell and the guys down at Stellenbosch. So I said, what do you want me to do? He said, we'd like you out for a week. We've looked at all the stats of all the teams, and the Springboks must have had the best collision stats in the competition, and that's all they go by in the US. It's the percentages and the stats. So they said, would you think of coming out? And I said, right. I said, I've just designed some equipment. I said, if you fly that equipment out and at your cost, I'll come and do a week for nothing for you if you pay my flight and I get out there, but bring my equipment. So took it out there. All the coaches were there, and Wayne said, listen, they might come, they might not, they might stay for 5 or 10 minutes, they might stay for your hour's presentation, whatever. So I started coaching, and it was all about tackle and, the different sort of levels I was talking about and all the methodology that I've now written about and rewritten. And within about 10 to 15 minutes, there must have been about 25 to 30 coaches there, and there was more coming in from everywhere. And at the very end, it went down really well. And Wayne Diesel said, listen, he said, that was superb. He said, there's a lot of good guys in there. So I did the week with them, worked with their players, worked with the coaches. And typical NFL, at the end of the week, they said, listen, would you like to come back for 10 days a month throughout the season? So I just said, listen, let's do it, So all of a sudden, I ended up with Miami Dolphins. We reached the playoffs in 2016. And it was just the beginning of the NFL journey for me. And since then, and this is the crazy thing about the NFL, in jokingly terms, stands for not for long, right? NFL, not for long, because either you're going to get injured as a player or you're going to lose your job as a coach, right? There's not many coaches have lasted like the Belichicks and these guys that lasted for years. So NFL, not for long. So within about 2 or 3 years of me being at the Dolphins, that whole coaching team had gone all over the NFL. So within a matter of 3 years, I pretty much had somebody in every NFL team that I knew. They knew you maybe knew the players. And we just had a great year there, and you just brought your own stamp on it. That was what you did. And the equipment they loved because there's nothing like it. And I was the first to ever create what is now known as technical training aids. I created technical training aids, and folks say, well, what's the difference between a technical training aid and a training aid? I said, well, the training aid is just a tube with PVC covering it. This one's got grip points on it. It's weighted. It's different levels in height. It was to bring around technical accuracy. So players loved it. Coaches loved it. And all of a sudden, I could spend hours talking about how we got the business going in the US, because it meant you getting in a plane and meeting 20 different people, you name it, but that was it. That was the start of it. And it's never finished.
Oh, awesome.
Unbelievable, isn't it? And now,
It's incredible.
Yeah. It seems to me, Richard, is just having spoken now for 20 minutes or something like that, is people. It's about relationships with you.
People. It's all about people. And it was a great, I'm lucky when I'm in America, you're in a different sort of world there. It's different. It's so different to rugby. But at the end of the day, it's still people, And I always say, I coach people, I don't coach players. And it's a really, really important thing. And you said at the beginning, G, is there any advice you would give? I used to coach players. When I was a young coach, I coached players, right? I coached them techniques and bits. Now, 65-70% is coaching people, and you add the technical things on, because what I coach, and G, you're similar, I'm coaching a pretty physical, I'm not going to say violent because that'd be the wrong word, but it's a brutal part of the game, And I've got to make sure that those players trust everything that I'm saying. So when I say, listen, I want you to do this, and I know you can do it, you've got the skills to do it, we'll work hard on this is your trait. They look at you in the eye and go, you know what, Richie Gray, I go with you 100%. And then when all of a sudden they do make a phenomenal steal in the last second of the game that we needed to win the ball, to get the penalty, to get the turnover, and you see the guy after, you don't even need to speak to the guy, you just know that, listen, there's been a lot of work gone into that to get you to this stage, but it's you. And there's a huge trust in it. I think you've got to be innovative. You've got to be passionate. I love what I do. Every day, I love what I do. I'm lucky to wake up in the morning and get on with what I pretty much have created. Because if somebody had said to me when I was a PE teacher, right, this is what you're going to do, there is no jobs like the one that I do. I was the first ever, I think, and I've had big debates over the years with this, but everybody seems to think you were the first ever contact collision coach that coached at international rugby, because it used to be an add-on to the forwards coach or an add-on to the backs coach. Heine Kamer, good on him, a visionary as well, and you know him well, Gurthro, decided to bring a guy from Galashiels, a village in Scotland, to
So
coach.
I just want to interrupt you there. Richie, all right? I think that there, right, you just opened the door there. I think this is a great learning for coaches. You're talking, you make it sound so easy, and it happens. Like, you didn't get an opportunity to work with Heineke just like that. And I remember that first day, it was in Johannesburg, where you came and you had this opportunity, and it just felt like I was in the Braveheart movie when you started, laying out the cones and explaining those drills. But can you tell us how you came about that opportunity with the box? And then I'll let you go with the story again.
There's there's a kind of South African thread running through here, isn't there? Because the opportunity with NFL actually came from Wayne Diesel. If Wayne hadn't got in touch with me, then the NFL journey wouldn't have started. But then if I hadn't gone to South Africa and met Wayne when I was down with Sully and the guys with the Stormers, it wouldn't have happened. So, and I could have easily turned around and said, I don't want to go to South Africa. I'm okay. I'll just continue and do my job. I've always, so if I've got a chance, I'll go. I'll take it. So the whole Springbok thing was incredible, because I, by this time, was head of sport at Borders College. We'd created a base, Border Academy of Sport and Excellence. I was heavily involved in that. I had invented a rucking sled called the Collision King, just because I was injuring too many players in practice. And I thought, right, I have to create something here. And there's a huge story behind that as well that we can spend another whole podcast on. So all of a sudden, you've created a sled. I have looked at over, it would be thousands of clips of breakdowns, body position, force, angles. I had a protractor on my television trying to get a mean sort of average angle that was appearing in a breakdown. Folk would think you were nuts, right? And I spent out. It became like an obsession, to be honest. It was, and I created the machine out of it. So nobody knew it better than me, you know. And on the back of that, you created a whole new lot of methodology. The 5 fights came into being, and then all the analysis. So all of a sudden, I'm keeping it, because I know Heineke. I'd met Heineke a year after I was at the Stormers. I'd said to Sully, where should I go next? And he went, there's a young coach at the Blue Bulls. He said, he's struggling at the moment. He said, but he's creating something really special there. So the next year, I went and visited the Bulls for 6 weeks. You were there, you know, and I was just this little guy for Scotland that came in watching what was going on. But, you know, it was one of the toughest times ever for Heineke because he was going to lose his job. Remember, that was the year they had that terrible year before they went on to win Super Rugby. And sometimes you got to go through the tough to come out the other side. So I got to know Heineke there, got on really well with him, good human being. We both were in some ways quite similar in the way we thought. So one thing led to another, a couple of phone calls a year, kept in touch with each other, you know, I'd drop him a text and things like that. And then he became the Springbok coach. And I remember watching South Africa versus Argentina, and I think it was in Mendoza, and I think he just won or it was a draw. And I remember Ronciero, the prop, was literally tableclothing every single ruck. So you had to try and move this guy out the way. It was killing South African ball. It was slowing them up. South Africa, phenomenal scrum line out and maul team, but they couldn't bend because they didn't practice it. You know, they weren't accurate when it came to what I call fight height, you know? And that was it. So I remember texting Heineke saying, listen, your team need to get sorted out. You know, you've got something here where you could be the world's best, but you're all too high in your body height. And I was brutally honest with her. And I heard nothing from him at all until Christmas Day. He must have been looking, you know, he must have been bored out of his mind, right? After a braai in South Africa.
I don't think he was ever bored, Heineke.
And he must have thought, bloody Richie Gray, what's he said? And you know what? So I got a text right away, you're right. What are we going to do about it, right? So I said, right, bring me down to Pretoria for a week. So Heineke got in touch with Rassie, and him and Rassie brought me down for a week to coach the Blue Bulls under-19s, which had Janse van Rensburg in my first ever session, but eventually I coached at Montpellier and he's still there now. It's quite funny that you keep meeting players that you've coached. And we had a phenomenal week. Johan van Graan was there, John McFarland was there, the whole crew. And I just sort of gave them everything I had regarding breakdown, but nobody had thought about it as sort of forensically as I had, you know, because it wasn't a big part of the game really, you know. It just happened, you know, or you had to be aggressive or, you know, things like that. There was no technical part to it. There was no formations. There was no sequences. So that was the beginning of it. And then Heineke obviously asked me, you know, would you ever consider coming down to work for us? And I said, you know, I would. Now, this time I was full-time lecturer. So I had to give up my job because he wanted me down in June. I gave up my job. I went and handed my resignation in. My principal said, listen, great, we always knew you'd get back into coaching eventually. Really want to wish you all the best. 3 days later, I was back knocking on the door to get my job back because it had all fallen through in South Africa. So I'm giving it, oh no, what's going on? And my wife is going like, what's happening here? I'm giving up a job and I'm taking it. So I'm back at work. Heineke's obviously hacked off because I think he'd wanted me there, but he said, listen, we can't get you out for June now. But the ironic thing was they played Scotland in Nelspruit and Scotland actually nearly beat them. That was Sia Ebenetzebeth's pretty much first run out at Nelspruit with the Springboks. It would be one of the first times they were capped. And I remember Heineke texts me after it. He says, right, that's it. You're getting out here for the Rugby Championship. And I was actually commentating on that game for the BBC. So I was commentating on it knowing nobody else knew I could have been out there coaching against my country, you know. So some of the things that have happened is incredible. So one thing led to another. I came back out again. I gave up my job for the second time. And out I came flew out to South Africa and started at a four-way secondary school on a Monday morning, and off we went, and we just started getting better, and there was real thought behind what we were doing. I really enjoyed coaching that group. For the whole time I was in South Africa, they were a great group of players, great group of coaches. Really, really enjoyed working with them, and we became pretty much one of the best, if not the best. I think we're the best stats in world rugby for about 3 years.
Richie, how was that coaching G? Did you have to kick his? Did you give him a good kick up the butt?
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say here, right?
Mate, say whatever you want. It's free reign.
He was in the twilight of his career, right? And he'd had a phenomenal career, G, and he still had a lot to give. And he was battling with weight as well, because life was treating G good, So
it wasn't my fault. It was the croissants and the rosé and the côte de boeuf and the foie gras. Yeah, it's not my fault.
You were across in Toulouse, and obviously the French lifestyle had flipping hit him straight between the eyes. And I used to get G on a Friday.
Oh my goodness!
For the dirt tracker sessions, and he bloody hated me because the dirt tracker sessions used to be a nice game of touch, a bit of running, a bit of movement, and then Gray arrives with low tackle bags and things that you've got to drive and hit, and it became a breakdown session. So literally that hour that used to be like running and nice game of touch and a bit sweat and then let's go to the shower became like the most brutal session of the week. But it became like a cult thing because we used to I gave out t-shirts, I had prizes for the best trainer, and incredible, the group that actually were that Dirt Tracker squad came through. Peter Steph de Toit was there, pretty much turned up first Friday. You had Sia, you had Marcel Coetzee, Khaleesi, you had all these young guys along with G and the older group that were battling on, And listen, fantastic times, great memories.
Awesome. It's actually funny you mentioned Wayne Diesel as well earlier. I met Wayne about 20-something years ago when I first got to Cape Town, and he was still working at the Sports Science Institute. And it was just that he was leaving to go to Spurs, I think it was, or Charlton.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah. So great guy.
The thing with that man's done Spurs. He was at Gloucester Rugby. He did Miami Dolphins. He did, I think, San Antonio Spurs at the end with Popovich. Phenomenal, and he's now, I think, with Red Bull, doing a bit of work with Red Bull. He's living in Wales now. I keep in touch with him a lot. Great guy. And, G, you mentioned at the start about the help, that I gave you. You must have people like that throughout your career that give you a helping hand. But I'll tell you what I've noticed. They give it to people that they know won't let them down. That's the key. They will bring you in and they'll say, no, Richie Gray, we're quite happy to have you in here, because they know when you're in there, you won't let them down. You'll go the extra mile. You'll work harder than anyone else to make sure that you're invited back. That's the key.
I think you mentioned something earlier where you were talking about you got to give it your all. You spoke about, when you were at the Bulls back in the day, meeting all the coaches and also the NFL coaches. You got to show that you have to show that you're passionate about what you're doing. And I think that's the biggest lesson for those young and inspiring coaches is that you can't just go and just be technical about things. Everybody's got technical knowledge, but they got to see that, listen, you got something different. You got that point of difference. And this guy's passionate about what he's doing. And I remember one of my first coaching gigs as a Scrum consultant was in the Netherlands, Richie.
I
went there to do a workshop. Was supposed to be 30 coaches and probably about 40 players. Great, planned it. The morning of the workshop, I pitched up a slight change of plans. We got about 70 coaches. Okay, no worries. Another change of plans. I'm like, we got 120 front row rugby players. And I'm like, what do I do? But anyway, I think that's one of the biggest lessons. You just got to go out there. You got to enjoy it. And I had fun. It took me about 30 minutes to just adjust and redesign a few things, but that is important. And also along the way, you also got to pass the buck on as well. You the knowledge that you shared with me and the guidance, I do exactly the same. And this is what Ben and myself is actually trying to do now through this podcast, Ben. I think you've got definitely some good insights as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
You know something, Ben? Sorry, guys, just to chip in there, and you've got to be yourself. That's what you've got to be, because players will smell it a mile off if you're not yourself. If you're trying to put on a persona of being somebody else. And it was a problem I think a lot of young coaches go through. When I was growing up in Scotland, you were under Jim Telfer, Ian McGeechan, Richie Dixon, great group. My father was a great coach, so I grew up in rugby. Father coached the south of Scotland and, had pretty much the Scotland Grand Slam 1984 team. So Rutherford, Rennicks, Laidlaws were all south of Scotland. So you'd grown up in all of that, but you've got to be yourself. And there's times, I think, when you're a young coach, you try maybe to emulate or model yourself on others until all of a sudden it hits you. Hang on a minute, I'm different to everybody else. Not in a bumptious way. We're all different. And I remember the first ever coaching education I did in South Africa. About 8 coaches turned up, and they literally put hard drives next to my computer. And I said, what's this? Well, what are your drills? I said, guys, I could give you every single drill I've got. You're not going to coach it like me. I won't coach it like you. You are your own IP. And people always say to me, and I do this, and people think you're mad. If you give, you get, right? If you give, you get. So I keep very little to myself, very little. Sometimes it's maybe a fault. You're maybe too out there and honest. But you know what? The minute I've given something away, I'm then thinking of the next thing. So it keeps me sharp, If I was one of these coaches, and I meet a lot of them that keep the book shut and they don't let you near, and you can just smell it a mile off that they're not going to tell it. I'm not interested, because every single place I've gone, I've coached differently because I've got different people in front of me. What I did with South Africa, I've never replicated with Scotland, because Scottish players, different psyche, different mentality, different culture. Then I go to Fiji. We did something totally different with Fiji around contact and collision. Totally different. Montpellier, Lyon, Toulon. 3 totally different places. And it's funny, I meet players that I've coached and they'll say, they'll come out with a word that maybe I used a lot when I was at that club, but I've never used it with Toulon. And you can see the Toulon boys going, what does Sanley mean? They keep going on about the Sanley. What's the Sanley? Which used to be the pig, that used to come flying through the grass, and we had analogies for everything. So I always change things because no team's the same. And somebody gave a great quote yesterday. Oh, he's got 30 years of experience. No, he's done the same thing for 30 years. That's not experience. That's not experience. You've got to evolve, and you've got to keep moving the game forward. Sorry, Ben. Chip in, mate. On you go.
No, it's awesome. Please carry on. Yeah, it's fascinating when I've got so many questions, but when you talk about going to different environments then, and you go to different cultures, so say you're in Montpellier, talk us through what's that like for you? Do you just observe for a bit at first? Do you, and how I'd love to know more about what that's like, because that's obviously you go to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yep.
You must be thinking I better keep my mouth shut for a bit here and just find out who's doing what.
Yeah, I would do it. I always try and look at. I love history. I think if I hadn't been a coach, I'd have been a history lecturer or teacher. I love history. We've got the Romans all around us here. We've got Reavers. This was one of the most violent areas on the planet where you live here. So. You always wonder why you do what you do, and if it's in the DNA and the whole contact, collision, defense, attack, it's like, old-fashioned warfare going back to it. So I remember when I went to Montpellier, and Vern Cotter was great for this too, because obviously I worked with Vern for a number of years, and Vern was good at this, just trying to look at, right, how are we going to create themes and things, and nobody was really theming 15, 20 years ago, Now theming's become massive, theme the week, theme the month, theme the season.
Yeah.
People are actually employing people to be the theme people now in a professional team.
Yeah.
So only 3 or 4 miles from Montpellier, but Nîmes, they've got one of the most phenomenal Roman fighting arenas on the planet. So I went and had a good look at all the gladiatorial fighting techniques and names and the thras and the tripod and different types of battle implements they took. And then we looked at the animals that were in and around the area, and just tie them all in so there's a sort of real feeling, all right, okay, so, Toulon, où est la différence? We are different. It's a war town. It's French Navy's there, the commandos are there. It's a fighting town, so totally different from Lyon. When I was in Lyon, it was a totally different town completely. And then Fiji, Scotland, South Africa, you couldn't get 3 more different international teams, but I purposely go to places that I think are going to be difficult as well. Folk will say, you'd never go there. Yes, I will. I remember when I went to South Africa, folks said, you'll last 6 weeks there because they don't like foreign coaches in South Africa. I went, oh, well, okay, let's see. So it's like a sort of challenge to me. It's like a kind of perverse challenge
from
to getting about it.
Yeah, Richie, from that point of view, going to South Africa with there's a lot of different, it's a really diverse country, So if you're coaching, so if you're coaching Scotland, generally the people are going to be quite similar, or they're going to come from quite a close area at least. Or how did you find that then, going to South Africa and dealing with that?
It was easy to me because first and foremost, I'm coaching people, not players. So, I don't care where you come from, who you are, what you've done, who your father was, what part of the country you come from, green, pink, blue, black, white, I don't care. I just want you to give effort in my sessions, and I want you to get 1% better every day. Simple as that. And I've been like that all my life. You could take me to Toulon, you could take me to any of the French clubs, 3 New Zealanders, 2 Australians, 2 Samoans, 1 Fijian, 10, 15 French. Treat them all the same. We're all human beings, head, heart, 2 arms, 2 legs. Let's just get going and let's work together. I've never ever held any sort of not too sure about them, And it's funny, you've got to be really careful here because people will say, oh, you're going to South Africa, oh, hey, the South Africans, they'll give you a comment of what they think South Africans are like. They'll give you a comment about what they think the Scots are like, what are Fijians like. Don't listen to it, because usually it's been on the back of somebody drunk in a bar that, they've thought, I don't like that, Americans are loud, for example. They're actually not, right? They're phenomenal. There's a lot of loud people out there, So I've never ever been swayed by even the point. I remember the greatest story when Miami Dolphins, on the first day I went in, the whole defensive room, you've got players there worth $100 million. And I was honest and says, listen, guys, I don't know who one of you are. I've not looked at any Wikipedia. I've not looked at anything. We'll all just start on day one, blank slate. And you could see some of them going like, bloody hell, this guy doesn't know who I am. Don't know who you are. Don't care. Let's see how you train this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Then we'll make a decision. So they're all going, bloody hell, we better get her, we better be on. Some guys went to the head coach to say, this guy you brought in doesn't know who I am, doesn't know who you are. What's going on? So, but even, you look at the Springbok team, I can still remember to this day, best line ever. On the centre spot at the 4 ways, Heine Kameer said, Rich, come with me. So he walked me out to the middle of the field. All the players were getting changed along the side. He says, I brought you here because I believe you're the best in the world at what you do. He said, I'm going to give you 1 chance. Don't F it up, right? Because if you do, you'll never coach again. He blew the whistle and 40 Springboks come walking towards you. And I thought, right, let's go. So, brilliant, brilliant.
But Richie, you just answered the question that I wanted to ask you. I think because that, you get a lot of coaches. Sometimes they might get intimidated by players. that are like high-profile players, and I was wondering, like, how did you earn that trust of those NFL players? And you just answered it there. You made it clear from the start. He's like, I don't know you are. You need to earn your stripes. You need to earn your respect.
Yeah.
And it takes me back to Johan van Graan as well. Back in the day, he was a young coach. He earned our respect, and he showed that he really cared about us. I think that's very important. And I think the common theme, which is coming through in a lot of your answers, we say, coach people, not players, is having that ability. We all have challenges that we are facing. We're all experiencing challenges. As all three of us sitting here today chatting, we're having fun. It's great, getting good energy from this conversation, but we all have something going on where it's tough. And that also ties in to what you said earlier. You also sometimes just need to slow down. You've got to learn to have fun, which is very important. But Richie, I just want to change the dynamic of the conversation a little bit. You shared a lot of things. I think you shared also some of your challenges that you faced and your journey, and it's great. It's brilliant, and I'm super, super proud of you and what you've achieved, and it's massive. Just shows that anything is possible. But I would like to know if there's anything that you can share with our listeners or our viewers, and maybe diving in a bit deeper, a time in your life, any experience which was really tough. This is where resilience was built, where it was forged. We had to really find solution. You spoke about being redundant, but like when you get to that dark place, what was the key driver or motivator that got you out of that hole?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're all of an age now where you possibly sadly lost people round about you as well. I lost my best mate and my business partner. A good friend of mine to cancer, sadly. Little things like that change your perception, I remember a South African journalist asking me at the World Cup, how do you cope with the pressure, right? And I said, to be honest with you, I had to chum my mate along because his mother was too old to go with him to a doctor's meeting to find out pretty much how long you've got to go or what's going to happen. That's pressure, We're dealing with 15 versus 15, chasing a blown up sheep's stomach around a bit of grass, Let's just put it all into perspective, And I've always been good at that. Don't get me wrong. I want to win, and I don't want my players standing behind the sticks. And I want my players to be, the most aggressive, accurate, technically proficient players in the league that they are in the game that they're in. That's what I want to happen. But you know what? I've just always been brought up as well. My father, as I said before, was a good coach. My father coached a high level, and he always used to say, and he was one of the most grounded people ever. He's still alive, 82 years old. He said, you know what? I'm only as good as my players. And I never ever heard my father ever once say, yeah, you know what? It was my tactics that, that's why we beat Andrew Slack's Grand Slam Wallabies in the 80s. The South of Scotland were the only Saturday team to beat them on that tour. Ellas, Lynas, Roger Gould at fullback, Poidevins, Lottens, all your legendary Australian players. I never heard them once ever say, yeah, I was the coach, and, no chance. So you've been brought up in that. I'm the same in my town, the Gala Shields. I still live in my town. I walk through it. I meet my friends, people that I've known all my life, people that have known you, when you fell out a bar when you were 18 years old, when you got your backside kicked up the high street because, you made an idiot of yourself. So you can't get too carried away. You just got to stay grounded, And I think to come back to for me, I've been incredibly lucky with the head coaches that I have worked for. I've been incredibly lucky. And I go back right to my school days, right through. Tony Gilbert came and coached the Reavers. He was ex-Otago Highlanders, coached New Zealand with Wayne Smith. Genuinely outstanding human being, and still involved with Otago Highlanders now. Goes down and watches Jamie Joseph and the crew train. He's down there every day. And then you've got, Heineke was great. Vern Cotter was phenomenal for me because, I didn't really have a great sort of love for the Scottish Rugby Union once they got rid of you, and we all got made redundant. So I remember folk used to say to me, "Oh, you've been invited back to coach Scotland after South Africa. You must be really proud of that." I said, "Vern Cotter asked me back." I said, "It wasn't the Scottish Rugby Union." I said, "Vern Cotter asked me back to coach Scotland." So, I thank Vern for a lot. And then Vern gave me the opportunity in France. And, we didn't know how it was going to work. A consultant, 10 days a month. And we thought, right, you know what, let's do this for a season and see how it goes. But in French top 14 rugby, it works brilliantly because it's such a long season. You want some guy that comes in with energy for 10 days. It just gives the other coaches a break. It's a different voice. It works brilliantly. So I think for me now, international rugby always worked well for me because it was a hothouse. It was 4, 6, 8 weeks intense and then gone. And this works well for me because it's 10 days, you're in, you're full on hairdryer, and then you're out. And just when they're beginning to forget things, you're back in again, So you've actually created a whole new way of working in our sport, And I think that you were the first really to do it. And I'm delighted, G, I've spoken to you, but I speak to a number of guys that are doing what I do across multiple leagues in the world. I've mentored a lot of them, and I just want them to have as good an experience as I'm having, And don't get me wrong, you have some bad days, defeats and you name it, but that's the sport, and the sport is getting up from that and fighting your way back out of it and finding a way,
But how did you fight out of that? That's the question. How did you fight out of it?
You know what
How
you
did
do?
you get to stay in that fight?
It's simple, right? One, it's got to be in here. So you've got to be a certain type of mentality because a lot of folk could just walk away. But you always go back to your process again, right? I've got things that I've written down over the years that I go back to. And sometimes I stray down the wrong path and maybe I start to get a little bit too technical. I said it at the top of the show, too much detail. I've got guys that are going to be in 160 to 180 tackle contests per game. I can't have their mind cluttered with, if that player does this, do that. If this player does that and carries the ball here, do this. Guys can't cope with that. So sometimes, again, it's making it simple, going back to the simple things that work well and making sure that they're drilled brilliantly under fatigue, under fatigue. Because it's easy training it when we're full of air and oxygen and walking about. You got to train it when you're in the dark, dark hole, And getting them there is an art form as well, because sometimes you have to get them there, then you have to train it. And we did that brilliantly with the Blitzboks over the period of time we were there. We totally changed the contact collision training. And some of your best sevens players that South Africa's ever seen came out of that group. So, and 15s, if you look at Quagga, Cheslin, all these guys came out of there, so it was a great breeding ground.
Hey, Richie, you touched on something then. You're talking about the individual. How do you go about coaching different people differently? Some players you coach, what it's like. They want all the detail on their opponent. They want to know everything. They want to be told more as well. And others don't want to be cluttered at all, do they? They just don't. They're not that they're ambivalent, but they're more like, I'll worry about myself. I don't,
Yeah.
Is there any advice you can give to coaches listening about how to deal with those different people and those different groups of individuals that you might encounter when you're coaching a group?
Yeah, I've been there. We're lucky because, a lot of us have sports, psychologists now, and, you can lean on them quite a bit as well. But I remember, and funnily enough, it would go back to G's day at the Bulls. I remember the Bulls were handed out a left side and right sided brain questionnaire, which gave the coaches a slight insight into Gurthro Stenkamp wants incredible detail, Bakis Botha wants to be left alone, Victor Matfield wants detail, Mornay Stain wants a little bit of detail but pretty much leave him. So they changed their whole half-time team talk because they found out that actually what they were saying to all the players, 2/3 of them weren't interested, And that's where those little things I used to love because they were like nuggets when I was a young coach thinking, that's bloody genius that, you know? So you're saying that guys in the dressing room all think differently. Yes. Wow, that's unbelievable, you know? And then when you actually look at it yourself, you think, right, you know, look at Schalk Burger, for example. Just leave Schalk alone. You know, Schalk could go and have a couple of glasses of red wine on a Friday night. It wouldn't matter. He could be
And a few
walking
beers.
around before
Don't forget the beers.
But the minute he walks across the white line, you know what you're going to get. There's other ones want to see the videos. They want to do the analysis. We're all different. And the key in coaching is you have to understand your player, or you can sometimes lose them. If you go about trying to coach that player the wrong way, there's going to be a disconnect. So you have to take a bit of time to work out what players what, you know?
How do you do that in a group setting though, Richie? Sorry, I probably didn't ask it very well, but how do you do that in a group setting when you've got those individuals who have differing needs, but you know, so you don't necessarily have the time to work with them individually, or you might have those little corridor chats and things like that. But in that group setting, do you bring it down to a common foundation that's quite, as you talked about at the outset with Heineke, quite simple, and you know, the simplicity? How do you manage that?
I look at. I've been involved in many different ways of doing it in all the teams I've been with. But you know, if I look at Fiji, for example, Fiji, the most important time for them, I think, was Lotu, which was 6 o'clock at night, where you know all the dress was put on and they came, and one of the players would give a reading, and there'd be meaning to it, and that's a bit of genius as well, because you could really get clear messages put over there. And the Fijian mindset was, and it taught me, that if everybody's got a common goal, you can cope with many different types within the room, but we all know we're going to there. Many of us might get there in different ways. Don't worry about it, right? This guy's going to spend 4 hours in the gym because that's his way of getting there. This guy's going to he's going to switch off and have music on. He's going to be laughing all the time. You're going to think he's not bothered. He is, but he still wants to get there. And the key is trying to bring them all there, but there's got to be a shared vision, and they've got to belong to something. You know, you got to belong to something.
Richie, I just want to jump in here quickly because we're running a bit out of time, and before Ben closes off the show for us here, and this is a question that we actually asked Omar Monami, defensive coach, and you know, he's just a passionate guy. How do you train aggression?
It's a good question.
How do you get players to be aggressive? Now, some of us are born with it, but not everybody's a bakkies boter. But how do you want to have aggressive team? You want guys to be aggressive at the right time.
Yeah.
You know, you need to get down and out. So how do you bring that out of players, especially if a player doesn't have it?
So I never ever use the word aggression. Very rarely. I use 2 words. It's got to be accurate aggression, because aggressive players sometimes can cause a lot of problems to themselves and to the opposition. Sometimes they don't last the game because they're sitting on the sides for 10 minutes or 20 or they're gone. So, you know what? In our world of contact and collision, you have to be brave. You know, to do it, you have to be brave. To start with, good on you. You know, well done. You're making the choice to cross the line. And we all know the challenges, and the, you know, media writes about it a lot now, but at the end of the day, the sports are trying to keep them as safe as possible, but you still have to make a decision to cross the line. You have to have some sort of aggressivity in your body to play and be involved in contact collision sports, right? If you're a non-aggressive passive, you wouldn't be here anyway, right? So I think, and this is my opinion, everyone's got aggression. Everyone's got it. It's just how you control it. That's the key. That's the key. And when I first came to France, I remember meeting old coaches talking about the breakdown. No. The breakdown is all about aggression. That's what the breakdown is, right? There's no technique. It's about aggression. And G used to say, you know, Guy Novez used to use an analogy of what he thought aggression was. So aggression is, it goes by the wayside. You got to have that, but you've got to be accurate with it, and you've got to make sure you can control it. And I always say, we're always trying to play a millimeter from madness. You know, if you think when somebody goes mad and loses it, you can get the strength of 10 men, you can just about rip a house apart. I want them a millimeter off it. That's where we are. The ceiling is a millimeter off it, because if we go through it, I don't know what I'm going to get then, you know? And also that's where sometimes coaches have got to be careful, because you can, and again, it's knowing your players, you can start to build a player up. And I've been there many times where you think, I've said enough to this guy now, or he's going to go through the brick wall, you know? So I'm just going to leave him alone now. So aggression, aggression's always going to be there, but you have to be accurate with it. A lot of players that are not aggressive are actually not accurate at their technique, so it stops them from being aggressive. I always say simplicity equals aggression. If it's simple and the player knows what's happening, bang, he can be aggressive.
But how do you train it, Richie? How do you get it out of the guys? How do you get you let's say, let me reframe this. You want to get accurate aggression, great. But how do you train it? How do you get it out of the guys?
Oh boy, Gurthro, that would be a whole another 2-hour session.
Okay.
For me, I work on ways that I know work for me, you know. I love working with training aids as long as they're the proper ones, because I know that instead of doing 30 minutes live, I can do 20 minutes of really accurate, fatigue, aggressive, full-blown, but we're on training aids, and then go 10 minutes live. And I remember when we did the study in the last year with the box with Dr. Craig and the guys, our injury rate was like just about zero. They couldn't believe it, you know. And we're doing a study at the moment with World Rugby at Cardiff Met, where we're changing the way that the boys train through the week, a lot more drill-based, technical technique work instead of always going live. And we're finding huge changes in upper body injuries, concussion rates. So there's got to be something in this. And I know we're just at the start of it. You've got to train accuracy though, especially in the game now with the laws. You know, we can't have inaccurate players. It's going to cost us, you know? It's going to cost us.
Richie, it's been awesome. It's so good spending time with you and just hearing some of your, your insight. I'd love to chat more. Can you give us, can we do a couple of quick fire questions? I'd love to know which team surprised you the most with how they just took it on board and how they adapted and how you saw a great development.
Boy, that's a tough one, because you would have failed with every team you've been with if you hadn't achieved what you wanted to achieve with them, you know. That's a great question. Every one of them's different, because as I said before, I never really do the same things with every single team because they're all different. I loved the Fijians. I loved working with the Fijians for 3.5 years. They were phenomenal guys, but you learned that they never wanted to let you down. So if you said, do you understand what I'm wanting? Yes, coach, no problem, happy. Yeah. But sometimes they didn't, right? So I learned very quickly that they never wanted to let you down.
They can't say no, can they? Yeah.
Yeah, they would never say no. So you had to then say, right, let's have a look at this again. So there was ways of coaching that team. The box side we had, you know, with Gurthro and the crew, Fury Dupree and the squad were an iconic team. There was 2 phenomenal teams on the planet at that time. You had McCaw's All Blacks, and you had the Jean de Villiers Springboks. You know, incredibly lucky to be involved at that time, where I still think they were the 2 best teams that I've seen for a long, long time. And it's funny, I always remember in 2015, Heineke said before the semi-final to me, we were having a quiet one just, you know, the night before the game. He says, you know what, it'll be the All Blacks or South Africa that will win 2015. He says, but this Springbok team will definitely win 2019. He said, I can guarantee it, because of all the players that were there and coming through. And, you know, he was right. Sadly, he didn't get a chance to do it, but, you know, it was that whole group that came through. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. To answer your question is really difficult. I get, as you know, something, boys, I've got a son who's 14, right? and I sometimes go up and coach their little team, and they're just starting out. I get as much of a buzz out of seeing hands to hands to hands to hands to ruck out wide, coming back, hitting up the middle, bang, bang, scoring the corner. It's like, I get as much joy out of that as I would coaching, a top quality pro team or international team or be involved in the NFL,
That's beautiful.
I don't think I can answer your question.
No, I get it. I get that, especially the last point. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Richie, we always ask our guests this one last question. Which is the biggest lesson that you've taken from the game that you use in your life now, every day?
Be yourself. Just be yourself, and I'll tell you what, don't compromise on it. So if some people, and thankfully I've never had this, but if people didn't like the way you went about your business, then I would move on, It's time for me to go, because, and it's funny this, I'm one of the few guys that, there's been a lot of teams I've coached that I've not wanted to leave, but because my head coach went, I go too. And I've always done that. So I would never ever stay on once the person that had brought me in went. So the key, what I'm saying here is, always keep your integrity, because that's bigger than anything else.
That's
and
brilliant.
That would be the key for me. Always keep your integrity, especially in professional sport, where one phone call, Gurthro Stenkamp's looking for a job, what's he like? Yeah, good guy. I would bring him in. Done. Like, never, ever, ever lose your integrity. And especially in the world of pro sport, where there's financial gain and where there's maybe ego takes over. My father once told me a great one: never take a job for ego, ever. And there's been a couple of times where I've been phoned or asked, would you come and work with us? I'm thinking, oh, I fancy working there. But then when you have a really good look at the coaching group and the team, it's maybe not the right fit for me, So I'm lucky. I've had Heineke Meyer, Vern Cotter, Pierre Mignoni, Tony Gilbert. I could name many others. I've had blooming good head coaches. I've been really lucky, and they've given me the chance because they know I won't let them down. Simple as that.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, Richie. Thanks for sharing.
Richie, thanks for taking the time for joining us. And before we sign off, just want to say thank you to all our listeners and viewers. And we really would appreciate it. If you enjoyed this podcast, leave a comment, whether it's on Spotify or YouTube. But also, we've realized that a lot of people are not following or subscribing to our show. Please follow and subscribe so we can grow the show and get unbelievable guests like my man Richie Gray, the Collision King, on here. Richie, we really enjoyed it. Thanks for taking the time. And we're definitely looking forward to having you on again. We didn't even deep dive enough in the ruck, but you shared so many gems with us and so many golden nuggets. We really do appreciate it. And to all those young players and aspiring coaches, please listen to this podcast again, make your notes, ask questions, and please hit us up with a DM or anything. Is any questions you have, and also don't hesitate to reach out to Richie. We'll put your website in the show notes as well, so people can reach out to you. So, Richie, thanks for taking the time, and
pleasure, guys.
we wish you all of the best.
No problem. And you know what, guys? Just to finish off, I always get asked, and you guys will get asked as well, why do you coach? And I always say two things: one, to make players better. And two, to just stay in the game. We're in a brilliant game. It's phenomenal, and I'm lucky enough to be in a number of contact collision games, not just rugby union, but make players better, stay in the game. That's all you need.
Awesome. Thanks, Richie.
Do it!